Hi, my name is Paul Grogan, and in this gaming rules video I'm going to be giving you my review of Blackout Hong Kong. Now right now I've managed to find some batteries for the camera. I've got 2 red volunteers and 2 blue volunteers and 4 resources of the same type working downstairs right now to try and restore the power. So if you just give it a little bit longer, hopefully... Aha! So we have the lights back on, we can go ahead with the rest of the review. Now this is a game which my Patreon supporters voted on as one of the games that they wanted me to review by the end of the year. Blackout Hong Kong, designed by Alexander Pfister, published by Eggert Spiel and Plan B Games. Alexander Pfister is one of my favourite designers. Mombasa, I think, is fantastic. It was my favourite game, or joint favourite game, the year it came out. Great Western Trail, I think, is absolutely fantastic and was my favourite game the year that came out. So this game I was super excited about. My plan was to pick this up in Essen on the first day, well, in fact, day 0, because I managed to get in early, and then play it on the Wednesday night. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. As they didn't get their copies of the game in time, so I didn't manage to play it at Essen, but I did play it afterwards. I have now played it 2, 3 and 4 players. I've played it 4 times in total. So this isn't quite a first impressions of the game, but it is everything that I think about the game currently. Now, for those of you who follow my channel normally, you will know that I don't really care about theming games. Now, I like it that the fact that there's a setting, and the setting of this game is it's in Hong Kong, and there's been a blackout, surprise, surprise, and you're basically trying to restore the power and sort out the food supplies and things like that. But for me, I'm a mechanics person. If the mechanics of the game are good, that's what I'm interested in, and the theme is fairly irrelevant. Now, I'm going to come straight out and say it, I don't think that there is very much theme in this game whatsoever. Now, a number of people might argue with that, but at no point during any of my games in this did I feel that I was helping restore Hong Kong after a blackout or I was working. No, I was trying to get points and I was doing it through the means of the game. Now, you could argue that there is theme in the cards. The fact that, you know, this card here is a black market and once I have provided 1 food and 2 med packs, I will get 2 points. And then for the rest of the game, I can spend, in my refresh phase, I can spend 2 money to buy a battery. Okay, so you could argue that in the cards themselves, in the card effects, there is theme in there. Okay, and I will give you that. But for me, I just see spend this resource and that resource to get this many points and an ability. Okay, now I don't really, as I say, I don't really care about a theme. Mechanics of the game, love it. Absolutely love the way that it plays. There is a very structured approach to it, which is shown on the player cards, on the player boards, which is really good. There's 8 phases and you go from bottom to top and you go through those 8 phases and you do that in a series of rounds. And these player boards are really good and they're very descriptive and very explanatory and they will really help you with the flow and the process of the game. Mechanically, I do really enjoy the game. I have some concerns about replayability. As I say, I've played it 4 times. And every game does play out in a similar way. The variability comes in the cards that are in the offer because there's a big stack of cards and the cards in the offer will dictate sort of which ones come out and you will be choosing which one of those you want to buy yourself. So depending on which ones you buy and which ones you want to try and achieve, then that will give you additional stuff to do during the game. However, I think overall the gameplay plays out in a similar way, but as I say, 4 games, I've enjoyed it and I will happily play again. The other thing about the game, and I am going to talk a bit at length about this. So I've said that it's a good game. I've said that I really enjoy the game. And I say mechanically, it's very good. Let's focus on the card play for a minute because it uses a very similar mechanism to Mombasa in that you have cards in your hand and you have 3 and potentially unlockable 4 areas to play your cards, and you may play 1 card into each slot a turn, and every time you play a card into a slot, that card gives you a special ability. So you might think, well, I want to play as many cards as I can a turn, and surely having 4 cards a turn is better. Well, yes, in a way, but the way that the cleanup works is very clever, and it has a couple of subtle differences to it, and I prefer this card play to that of Mombasa. So if you like the card play in Mombasa, you're probably going to like this. So I think that's really clever. But one of the things that I am going to touch on quite a lot here are some of the negatives of the game. And unfortunately, I think the game is let down by artwork it's okay, but it's not great, in my opinion. But artwork is very subjective. Whereas graphic design, I believe graphic design, there's a part of graphic design that can be subjective, and there's a part of graphic design that is objective, in my opinion, which is really unusual. But, for example, you have icons on the dice, and here we have the yellow dice with a white icon on it. Well, white on yellow is hard to see. The next thing is a lot of these icons look very similar. So if we have a look at the book icon and the gas icon, very similar. Causes problems during the game. And I'm not just making this up. I've played 4 games now, and in every game, this has been a problem. Oh, what's that again? Oh, that looks a little bit too similar to this. And you might think, well, on dice, that's okay. But let's look at some of the counters. Now, these counters you get for scouting areas, the graphic design on these is diabolical, in my opinion. It's just the icons are so tiny and so hard to see. But it gets worse. You have an emergency plan that you need to succeed in. And to do the emergency plan, you need to have 2 of the scouting tiles of the types listed on there. And you can hardly see. So that's a bit of a problem. The other problem is the colours. Now, as I say, I've played this, I've said it a few times now, I've played this 4 times. In every single game, at least one player has had an issue with the colours that's caused them to make a gameplay mistake in the game, and sometimes a fairly critical mistake. So, for a start, the board is black and everything's dark. I don't mind that. That's the style because it's suited to the theme of the game. But to have dark purple, dark red, dark blue in a game on icons. Now, I'm showing this here. I've got good lighting in the studio and I'm using color correction on my video. So it's probably gonna look fine to you here. But this here is 2 red and 2 blue. This here is 2 purple and 2 yellow. Sometimes, and I'm not just saying in bad light, but in normal lighting conditions, unless you have super lights like I've got in the studio, the red and the purple, as I say, 4 games, every game somebody has made a mistake. So the colours are pretty bad. The player colours are okay. One of the problems is this board here. This is the rondel, and it's clever in a way that you use cubes to represent how many resources you have of each type. So you can see here that the orange player has 2 medkits, the green player has 1 food. That's fine until you get a number of cubes in an area, and then they cover up the actual picture that's in there, so you can no longer see what that is. It's just, you know, these spaces here, once they get covered by the cubes, you can't then see what's in the space. It's just little things like this. So every time I've played it, I've enjoyed the mechanics, I've enjoyed the game. But the graphic design issues have caused gameplay problems during the game. And I think that is holding back what could have been a great game. And the game itself, mechanically, is great and I do enjoy it. But the graphic design problems really do let it down. So let's touch on some of the actual mechanics of the game that I do really like. So I've mentioned the card play mechanic. It's very clever, but there's a couple of little subtle bits to it as well, because in the refresh phase, if you decide to refresh, if you can, and it's not automatic, but if you can refresh, you need to decide whether you want to or not. And if you do, you take back the biggest stack of cards. So sometimes, because there are bonuses and things that you want to be aiming for with certain colours of cards in certain stacks, you've got to think, right, well, if I refresh now, I'm going to take that stack, and I don't want to take back that stack because I'm trying to build that stack up. So you might not want to refresh. Or if you rewind back to the start of the round, you might not want to play a card on that stack, because by playing a card on that stack, you've now made that stack the biggest, and therefore when you do refresh, you'll take that back into your hand. So lots of little interesting decisions about where you play the cards and whether you actually want to play a card or not. Another bit I like about the game is the part of the game where you're purchasing these new cards from this area here. Now, the way that this works is you basically pay 1 more than the number of cards in the row. So if there's a row filled with 3, then you will pay 4. And then the card will go, and you can buy any one you want. And that card goes into your objectives area, which you then need to complete. But now that row only has 2 cards in it. So the next player, if they want to buy one from there, it costs 3. And then let's say they do buy one from there. Now, the last card in that row remaining will cost 2. And when it's bought, or in the cleanup step, when the rightmost card gets removed, that's when you refresh the cards. So it's a very simple mechanic, but it's the fact that The cards get cheaper the less cards there are in a row. I say, very simple, but really like it. Another little mechanic I like about the game is in the part of the game where you're actually choosing which resources you want from the rondel. So basically the dice are rolled at the start of the round and they determine what your cards do. So if the yellow dice is on the book icon, then any card that you play that gets you yellow things, this one, will get you this number of those things. Either 1, 2, and certain super specialists are 3. Now, you've got these little truck tokens and you can use these truck tokens to effectively send that volunteer to the next space on the rondel. So really like that, and you can always buy extra ones of these for 1 victory point. So there is some mitigation to the dice. There is still the luck element of, oh well, I don't have any truck tokens and the dice have not rolled on the places I need them, so I'm actually going to have to spend victory points in order to get what I want. That's a decision you need to make. There is also a slight luck factor in these tiles here. So these are the scouting tiles, and when you scout an area, you look at the tiles and then you can choose to scout one of them if you want to. There is a little bit of a memory element in the game that is not particularly great for me because I've got a terrible memory. It's like I kind of want some kind of marker on a space to say, look, Paul's looked at this space, so he knows what's there. But there was one game that I played, because at the end of the game, you'll get bonus points for the different types, the number of different types you've completed. And for my emergency plan, I needed to complete a particular one, and I just couldn't find that one anywhere. And nearing the end of the game, it was a case of, right, I now need to go looking at the stacks, and if this stack does contain one of those ones I'm looking for, then I'm going to do it, otherwise I'm not. So, I mean, to be honest, I shouldn't have left it that long to go looking, so that was kind of my fault. But there is a little bit of a luck factor in there. Is it something that I would change, fix? Is it going to stop me playing the game? Not at all. It's just one of those things you need to be aware of. So, moving on to other things that I cover in my reviews. Rulebook. Rulebook was pretty good. We didn't have any problems with the rulebook except for the section on scouting. So the section on scouting, it wasn't 100% clear, because the section on scouting is probably the most complicated part of the game, because you've got a few different options. That bit wasn't completely clear, and it could have done with a bullet point series of list or numbered steps on exactly what you do in the various options that you can do. But apart from that, rulebook was fine, didn't really have any problems with it. Components wise, I've not had any problems with the components. I heard a number of people at Essen saying that because the cards were very black, they were getting, the cards appeared to be getting worn fairly soon. So you'll notice I've got my cards in sleeves. I sleeve them as soon as I opened the box. So I haven't played with the cards unsleeved. So the cards seem fine and might be okay. I'm just, as I say, I like to keep my games in good condition, and I'm just going off what other people were saying at Essen about the cards getting worn fairly quickly, so I sleeve them. Apart from that, the components, nothing wrong with the components. I did have a bit of a slight punching issue in that some of my components were slightly misprinted. Plan B Games offered to send me replacements, but I decided it wasn't worth it because they're fine. It's not a big problem. So yeah, components wise, absolutely fine. Now, another negative on the game is these player boards. I mentioned these player boards are really good and there's loads of information on them, but it's a big table hog. You need space to the right hand side, which is your hospital. You need space on the left hand side, which is where you put your checkmark actions, and you need space below to actually play your cards. And you're probably going to be playing 4, maybe 5 cards in a row. So it's taking up a lot of space, which means on a normal table, I've got it set up here. So I've got my player board here and the board here. You can't have that because right now there's no, well, you could if I'm playing 2-player with somebody next to me, but there's no room for anybody on the other side of the board. So you've actually got to have your player board to the left-hand side of the main board, which is where these are. So in every game I've played, I've not put these where you're supposed to put them because the player boards need to go there. So it's just something to consider that your player area takes up a huge amount of space. I don't know if they could have done it different because there's no reason for these cards to be the size they are. They could have been smaller cards, I think. But it's just one of those things. As I say, it's space on the table is a premium for some people. And in this game, it does make the layout a little bit fiddly. Now, on to the campaign mode. The game is for 2, 3 and 4 players. I've played it 2, 3 and 4 players. The 4-player game has a lot more interaction on the main board area. In a 2-player game, you're not really, I mean, for a start, there's no blocking on the main board. You can go where somebody else has, and that's fine. But when you surround an area, you'll get a certain number of points and you'll get a bonus, and other players will get points for being in that area. Well, when you play it 2-player, you're probably going to stick to completely separate areas, and that is not going to come into play. Whereas in a 4-player game, it's a little bit more interesting. The campaign mode is something that I was looking forward to. So, as well as the base game, I was told that there's a campaign mode with an ongoing story. It's a series of 5 connected scenarios, and I was looking forward to playing it. Now, I have to say, I was a bit disappointed by the campaign mode. First of all, it's 5 separate scenarios that slightly modify the rules of the game. So, campaign scenario number 1, all you do is play with slightly more cards in the deck, so it's a slightly longer game. And the emergency plan, each player has an emergency plan. Well, instead of it being a shared plan, instead of it being a plan, each player having their own, there's a shared one. And in order for you to win the game, you have to complete all of the goals on the plan. Whereas normally you don't have to complete all of them. They're just worth money and points if you do. So the only difference is there's a shared plan that you have to do, and there's slightly more cards in the deck. So for me, that's not really... oh, and at the end of the scenario, that's it. You then play the second scenario, which uses a slightly different plan and has fewer cards in the deck, so it's a much shorter game. And that's really it. There isn't really any connected story between each of them. There's a line of flavour text at the start of each scenario to say T plus 24 hours, the lights have gone out, we're struggling for food supplies, and then you play the game. And then the second scenario is T plus whatever hours, and there's another line of flavour text. That for me is not an ongoing campaign, ongoing story. It's here's 5 different scenarios to play during the game, which slightly modify the game, but only slightly. There is nothing that carries forward from one to another in terms of an ongoing storyline or progression, unless we talk about the orchid trees, which is a little bit unusual. So in the campaign mode, if you are playing the campaign, at the end of each game, you look up your score on a table and you score orchid trees. And I'm not sure why they're orchid trees, but there's probably some thematic reason. And if you're playing a solo game, I can understand that. If you're playing the solo campaign, sure, you'll play all 5 scenarios in order and you will score orchid trees at the end of them to see how well you did. But when you're playing it multiplayer, the campaign mode for me was just 5 different scenarios that tweak the rules of the game very slightly. So I was a little disappointed by the campaign mode. Anyway, that said, I think the game is a very good game as long as you can get over the graphic design issues, which some people might disagree with, but as I say, I think there are graphic design issues. And I'll more than happily play some of the other scenarios in that book, but it's not really an ongoing campaign with an evolving story. It isn't that. It's just, oh, here's a scenario, but it's going to be slightly shorter and we've got one shared objective. Or for this scenario, we have to have cubes on 4 red spaces by the end of the game in order to be able to win. Okay, that's fine. I'm more than happy to play it. So yeah, I know I've talked a lot about the negatives and I've probably focused more on the negatives than the positives. Is it a game that I would want to play again? Yes, very much so. To be honest, out of Alexander Pfister's top 3 big games, Great Western Trail, Mombasa and this one, this is my least favourite of the 3. But I've mentioned at the start that the other 2 games were my favourite games of the year in which they came out. So it was always going to be a bit tricky for this one to be as good as them. I do enjoy it, I just don't enjoy it as much of them. But yeah, if you played the game, let me know what you think. Do you disagree that there's a graphic design problem? I'm keen to hear from you. And yeah, if you've played the game and you like the game, then please let me know in the comments below. As mentioned at the start, this video has been created thanks to my Patreon campaign. So if you like this video and any of the other content that I create, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. I am trying to move the channel in a new direction next year and I need your help in order to do so. So until next time, take care and thanks for watching. Gaming Rules is proudly sponsored by Game Toppers, upgrading your gaming experience. Visit GameToppersLLC.com.